a good part of why we are meeting here too, is for y'all to say hello to each other. So I'm always happy for that. I hope everyone enjoyed the meal. I hope everyone enjoyed the meal. I want to hear a round of applause if you hear. That was from Bridgefield. They've been taking care of our lunches for the past couple of months. So hopefully we can still continue working with them. We'll see. All right. Well, the next big meeting that we're having is a membership meeting. I know not everyone here is a member. To become a member of the Bluegrass Council of the Blind, you know, you really just need to pay your dues, and dues for membership is only $10 for the entire year. Yeah, and so that's per person. We do have sponsorships available. If that $10 proves to be a burden for you, just talk to me about that and we can get you signed up. We'd love to have memberships because it helps us with the national organization with, you know, our clout, so to speak, you know, because we have more people voting, and you can go to convention, and you just do all kinds of things. You get the you sign up for the Braille Forum, which is not a Braille magazine, but it is about being blind and or visually impaired, and it's one of the American Council of the Blind publications. So I just want to let you all know about that. Our membership meeting is June the 7th, and we meet quarterly, so we meet 4 times a year. Our annual meeting is in September, and then we have a meeting in December as well, which is our holiday luncheon, and it's a wonderful time. So don't miss out if you want to become a member. It's good time to get together, socialize, get to meet more people that way, because we find out who all is here. We don't always have time at these lunch and learns to go around and introduce everybody to everybody. So I hope you've enjoyed meeting the people at your table. So that's June the 7th is our membership meeting. And if you want to become a member, just talk to me or any other staff person, and we can get you signed up. Our lunch and learns are every 4th Wednesday from 12 to 2. So every 4th Wednesday up through October. Yeah, so any other questions that you might have about anything? Well, the restrooms are located out in the hallway where you came in. Just if you need help, Liz is there at the table. She can direct you to where you need to go. And the code to get into the restroom over there is 3475. 3475, and she can remind you of that too. All right, well, thanks again to all our volunteers. I want to introduce our speaker. You ready to record while I record? Okay. Our speaker today is Larry McNabb. Larry has a master's in rehabilitation counseling from UK, and he's a certified rehabilitation counselor as well. He's a certified QPR suicide prevention gatekeeper trainer since 2010. And he became a master trainer with the QPR Institute in Spokane, Washington in December of 2020. I first heard Larry speak at a meeting of the Kentucky Council of Citizens with Low Vision. And he spoke at that time on suicide prevention, and he has a wealth of information to share with us today about that topic. So with no further ado, here is Larry. Hold this, or do you want this?
Probably I'll hold it. Okay. Just like you're doing. Everybody call you Susan here?
Yes.
Okay. You know, they used your professional title of the doctor. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today and to speak to you on a topic that many of us would rather not have to have this topic. Some of you have shared with me already about your own experience with suicide loss. And you know without any doubt that suicide loss is unlike any other type of loss you can experience. If you're in the process of going through that loss, or it has been even years down the road, you still have a lot of those ambushes. I'm going to stick this up here so we maybe cut back. Let's see if I can get in this thing in here. There. I just want to take that noise out. But even if it's been years since you've experienced your loss, you know that the ambushes that come with the loss of any type, but a lot of times we struggle with why. Why did my loved one take their life? Why did my loved one do it when they did? Why did my loved one end their life in that manner? And it's not an attempt. There are many people that are attempt survivors. So what I want to say right off the bat, with those few things being said, there are some trigger warnings, and I want to prepare you for that. There are some things we'll be talking about in the next few moments in these slides that we'll talk about how to prepare you, what to look for, how to help someone. And with that, we're going to be using suicide language. So there will maybe some things that we talk about or stories I share with you that you may say, I'm not ready for that. My loss is more recent and I really struggle with it. If you need to step out for a moment, please do so. Your safety is what I'm most concerned with. And so keep that in mind as we go through this. I'm going to see how well Richard did on setting up the slides. Oh, yes, I knew he'd be on it. Way to go, Richard. Thank you so much. Just give him a hand. I know Richard from emails and correspondence when I was a vocational rehabilitation counselor with the Kentucky Office for the Blind, as well as the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation Blind Services. I stepped down from that position at the end of November of 2022. But during that time, I was able to work with Richard on a consumer or two that he was working with Braille services with them. So, so even though we never met in person like we are today, I have met him before. And as I look out in the room, I see another familiar face from a conference, an optometric conference that we had with eye doctors. So I know Bluegrass Council for the Blind is well known, and it even up in our area, we have the Northern Kentucky Council of the Blind. And then on my tie clip here, I have the American Council of the Blind. I was fortunate enough to go to one of the national conferences years ago when it was in Phoenix. So I was there representing our agency, the Office for the Blind at the time, for that conference, and got to really experience a lot of great things. The audio description was a great thing that I was able to witness. So I do have a lot of experience working as a vocational rehab counselor with those that are blind or visually impaired. And recently I ran into some of my own visual impairment with cataracts. So now I'm looking at you, you're blurry. And I'm going, okay, that's a little different. And so as difficult as that is, I know for some of you here, you're saying, well, I wish mine was just cataracts. And some of you may say, hey, I was born this way. This is the way I know life. And so what I'm hoping here today is I can give you some tools that can help you, because when we look at individuals that are more prone to end their life by suicide, what would be the age group? Does anybody want to give me a guess? What age group do you think has the highest risk for suicide? I'm sorry, what's that? Okay.
20 and 12 to 25.
Okay, you got several guesses. Teens? Did I hear somebody say the elderly or the seniors? I think I heard, okay, I heard up here too. Actually, the highest population we have for suicide loss is 85 plus. More people will end their life by suicide with our seniors. And my wife is a manager of a senior center in Burlington at the YMCA in Burlington in Boone County in Northern Kentucky. She's been there for quite a few years and she loves her job. She loves her boss. And I said, ideal situation. But the thing that a lot of people don't realize, when we look at teens and young adults, that is the fastest growing group to experience suicide loss. But they have a high number of attempts. Teenagers and young adults up to their early 20s, we see that there is approximately 100 to 200 attempts for every suicide loss. That's a lot of attempts for every suicide loss. Many of these that I've talked to over the years, being involved in suicide prevention for many years, have been middle school students. So we're talking about 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So we're looking at a very young population when we're looking at those that are attempting to end their life at such a young age. But when we look at those that are 85 and older, we only see 4 attempts for every suicide. 4 attempts for every suicide. And this is 85 and older. So when we look at that, when you hear somebody say, I'm a burden to my family would be better off without me. That's where I'd say to the people that work with our seniors, pay attention to that. They're giving you a warning sign that they're really having a hard time living each day, going through what they're going through. They do think that my family might be better off without me being here. And once they get to that point, it's hard to really reach out and try to help them understand, no, love dearly. Many people are looking for guidance, direction, still in their life. You still have a lot of life left to live. And for that person, though, we need to make sure we sit down and have that conversation. I'm not going to go into a lot of my information on my background in suicide prevention. Susan had done a great job with the introduction, but I have been doing this type of trainings and work for since 2010. I've been a part of the Kentucky Suicide Prevention Group since 2008. I was the vice chair of the Kentucky Suicide Prevention Group, Inc., INC, since 2012 until recently. I stepped down from that position as the vice chair, but I'm still on the board with the Kentucky Suicide Prevention Group because I want to stay in the trenches. I want to let you know in the community that this is a real situation, something that we all can do something to possibly help someone that may be suicidal. So as I go through my background, one thing I want to bring up is that I'm a survivor of severe depression, general anxiety with panic attacks. I know what it's like to look in a mirror and not recognize the person that's looking at you. When you start losing a lot of weight, you start having things going on with your brain that you're not sure what's messing with your brain at the time. The chemistry, the chemicals that are in your brain, we could go into a lot of names here, but I won't go into a lot of the dopamine and those types of things. But I will say to you that there is some things that you go down on your path that people don't realize unless you've been there. And I know in a group like this, there's several of you that's had your struggle with mental health. There are some of you that may have said at one time or another, am I a burden to those around me? Would they be better off without me? So when we look at that, that's why it's so important for all of us to know what to look for and what to do when we see those signs. Because it's not a matter of if you come across someone that's suicidal, it's a matter of when. And do you know what to do when you do come across that person that needs help right then and there? And that's what I love about QPR. Has anybody ever had a training called QPR? QPR is question. You ask the question to someone. When you start getting a gut instinct, something that says to you, this person, I think, is contemplating suicide. They're thinking about suicide. Ask the question. In the midst of your conversation, go ahead and ask. You know, some people, as depressed as you seem to be, they think about suicide. I'm wondering, are you thinking about it? That lets other people know that you're not alone. There's other people that feel that way as well. Because many people that become suicidal thinks that there's no one that understands them. No one understands what they're going through. And so when you get to that point, you realize I'm all alone. I'm isolated. We went through this pandemic and our world was shut down. Something that none of us has ever been through probably in this room. Unless you were alive in 1917, 1918, when the Spanish flu went through. And the few people that were alive when that pandemic happened were so young that they said, I really don't remember much about that one. But we know what it's like to actually see the world close down and us become more isolated from one another. You weren't able to meet like this for quite a while. And you had to get on your Zoom meetings on your computer or your phone just to join in with groups. So we know that when you start struggling with your mental health, you also start getting to a point where you feel like, does anybody care? Does anybody care about me as a person? Because that's the core question that every one of us has. Do you care? If we know that someone cares about us, we may share some things with them that we wouldn't share with anybody, maybe some of our own family, because that person took time to sit down and listen to you and what's going on. You realize that person does care. So as we go through this, the best way to get a hold of me, if you want to reach out to me after this little presentation today, just reach out to Susan. She has my contact information on my email and all, that she could reach out to me on any questions, or if you would like for me to come back down into this area in Lexington and share the actual training, the QPR training, with anybody that may benefit from that. And as I always say, all of us can benefit from knowing question, persuade, refer. And when you have those 3 steps, 3 simple steps, just like CPR. Does anybody know what CPR is? What does CPR do? It saves your life. Someone having a heart attack, you can do CPR. Try to help them until you have the ambulance arrives and the emergency medical team gets there to start doing their thing to bring them to the hospital, to try to help save their life. You started that process by giving them CPR. QPR saves lives as well. When you're willing to ask the question, if someone is thinking about suicide, you persuade them there's help out there. There's people that can help you with this struggle that you're going through. Let me help connect you to that. And then know what your resources are. Do you know here in Lexington, who would you turn to if you knew you was talking to someone that may be suicidal, that is thinking about ending their life? Do you know of the local crisis center that can help someone that may be struggling with suicidal thoughts? 988. 988. We got someone right here that knows the new number for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline.
Is that right?
That is right.
Okay.
Good job. Thank you for bringing that up. When you have no idea and you're saying, I don't know how to get them help with a crisis center. I don't know what that resource is here in Fayette County in Lexington. There is 988. It just recently turned to 988. 3 simple numbers, just like 911 for other medical emergencies. You can call 988 and the person you connect with will be able to help you right where you're at with your own resources in your area and to talk to you to try to help you through some of those struggles of you thinking about suicide. And so with 988, I always say, I know it's 3 numbers, but it's a new 3 numbers. Put it in your cell phone as a contact. Say, I want to have it right there just in case I get nervous and I come across someone that may be thinking about suicide and going, oh, there's an emergency number. What is it? We may not think we'll ever forget 988, but you might be surprised when you're in a crisis situation, but your brain maybe goes through as you're helping someone that may be thinking about ending their life. Another number that you can use is for our younger population, and I know many of you have grandkids, great-grandkids that like to text. When you text, there is a number 741-741. You just use those 3 same numbers, 741-741, and you send that on your text with the word home or start. Pretty simple. Home or start, and send it to 741-741. Someone comes on your text to start helping you with your struggle. That's where technology is today. So if you don't know any crisis center in your area and you come across someone that needs help right away, keep those numbers, especially 988, because you can text that number, you can call that number, or you can actually go to their website on your phone or wherever you may be and actually bring up a chat feature that someone will chat with you on their website. So I'm going to try something here with you guys. As we don't have a whole lot of time, I want to make sure we cover several things in just our little bit of time. How many of you have had a conversation with someone on suicide? Anybody in here? Oh, I see several hands. What we're going to do, I'm going to count to 3. When I count to 3, I want everybody in here to say suicide out loud. Easy enough? Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Some of y'all really belted it out there. I like that. Let me ask you, how did that make you feel to say that word out loud? What went through your mind? Does anybody have a thought on something that maybe went through your mind as you said that word out loud? For some, it may have been the first time you said it. Empowered? That's a good word, because I don't hear usually the positive of saying it out loud, that it helps to release that maybe when we talk about in our society here, death, died, dying, we don't like to use those words in our society. Usually when we experience the loss of someone, we'll say, my loved one is no longer here. My loved one has went to a better place where they no longer have to hurt. My loved one, and you'll come up with other phrases to describe their death, that they have died. And so when you think about that, think about how you are with suicide. That is a word we still don't use every day. Many of us never use it in our conversation. So to say it out loud, empowerment being the first thing that we heard that came to mind, is it empowers you to say, okay, I said it out loud. Now I feel like I'm more sure that if I was to come across someone, but not the if, but when I come across someone that may be suicidal, can I say that word to them? Can I have a conversation around suicide with that person? Because some people will say, it makes me feel angry when I say that word out loud, because you realize it has affected someone you love. You've been affected by suicide loss. And if that's you, I'm sorry that you're going through such a devastating loss as suicide loss. But you may feel guilt. You may say, I feel guilty because I wish I could have helped that person. Well, when you look at those around you each and every day, we're going to look at 2 slides here. And I like to interact with you guys. So I'm going to ask you 5 questions. And if you can raise your hand, I want you to raise your hand if it pertains to you. If that question is, okay, that's me. I know someone. Okay, here's your question. How many people here have had a loved one or someone close to you in their life by suicide? How many? Keep your hands up for a moment. How many people here have had a loved one or someone close to you attempt to end their life by suicide? Keep your hands up if you've answered either one or already both of them. How many people here have had a loved one or someone close to you suffer with depression or some type of mental health disorder? Raise your hand. Some of y'all may already have both. Keep them up for just 2 more questions. The next question is, how many people here have had a loved one or someone close to you that's had a drug or alcohol problem? And then the last one, how many in here has had a loved one or someone close to you experience a trauma, especially if that trauma or life-changing incident has happened recently? Raise your hand. Okay, keep your hands up for just a moment. How many of you all raise your hands at least once? Raise your hand one more time. How many raise both hands? If you can raise both hands. Okay, look around the room before you put your hands down. Look around the room. How many people has been affected? Okay, go ahead and put your hands down. Thank you. It was a lot. Many people. Some of us will realize that all 5 of these, I could raise my hand probably 4. If you are someone that raised your hand even once, you're already surrounded by people that could be higher risk for suicide. Have that conversation. I can't say that enough, how important it is for us to have that conversation. For many years, we wondered how many people overall are affected by one suicide loss. On average, how many people are affected by one suicide loss? They didn't have a study. There wasn't anything done to research this. They found out here recently that you have between 125 to 145 people are affected or impacted by each suicide. Of that number, 25 on average has to get counseling because it affected them so substantially. So when we look at that, we realize that for some people, if you're well known in your community and you end your life by suicide, it may affect many more people than just 145. Back home in Northern Kentucky, we've had some students that ended their life by suicide in recent years. And that was a whole community affected by that loss because that person was known. They played sports at the local high school. They were someone that had many friends at school. They were well liked. So on average, we may look at 125 to 145, but in some losses, it's much higher than that. So thank you all for taking part in the questions. So how big of a problem is suicide? How many people die each year by suicide? Almost 50 million? A million? Actually, around the world, it's close to a million. About 800,000 people die around the world each year by suicide. Here in the United States, we see the latest number is 2021. In 2021, we see over 48,000 people were documented to have taken their life by suicide. This is a 4% increase from the 2 previous years. In 2019 and 2020, which what happened in 2020? The pandemic. The pandemic, we saw shutting everything down. You would thought that suicide numbers were higher in 2020, but actually for the 2nd year in a row and the first time in 15 years, we saw suicide go down a 2nd year in a row. Just like the flu. Just like the flu. But when you look at 2021, just a year later, we saw the numbers starting to creep back up again. I'm going to give you one fact here that on suicides spike or get higher 12 to 18 months after a crisis. So the pandemic may have happened in March of 2020, but it was that next year that we started seeing how many people were affected and we saw suicides go higher. So now we're really concerned about 2022. What will those numbers show because of the crisis? A lot of people will huddle together, try to reach out to one another in times of crisis. 9/11, we saw the same thing. We saw that people came together when we were under attack as a nation. We said, hey, let's come together and help each other, because many people experienced great loss from those towers, from the Pentagon, from the plane that was in, I guess it was over in western part of Pennsylvania. So when we looked at that, we realized a lot of people come together to help one another in the initial onset of a crisis. But as time goes on, people tend to start living their own life, trying to move on, if you will, or move forward from that crisis. And many of them have a hard time being able to do that. I can't move on. I'm stuck. I feel like I can't make that next step. And that's what makes it hard. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I would say probably due to the after with people trying to readjust to everything that is going on.
And we're in that time. Yeah. And I think that's a great point that you bring up there. And what's your first name? Christy, nice to meet you. When we look at the world around us, many people will look at, will help us. When we first experience loss, people seem like they gather around. Your neighbors, friends will gather around and they'll bring meals to your house and they'll say, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. But after a little while, people started living their own lives. And it's like, oh, don't they still know that my loved one is still gone? How come people aren't still here helping me? They have so quickly moved on. Or actually moved on says that you moved on without bringing that person along with you that you may have experienced that loss with. But when you say I moved forward, you're bringing that person's memories with you. And so there's a difference between moving on and moving forward. Moving forward, hang on to your loved one. If you're someone that raised your hand and says, I've experienced that loss by suicide, hold on to the memories of that loved one. Don't let their death define them as a person. Their death is not who they were. It's the life they lived and the people they affected. So when we look at this, at the bottom of this slide here, it says that suicides now exceed deaths by car crashes. So there is more suicides than there are people that die in car accidents.
Forcing them to use seat belts in cars.
Uh-oh, we got another debate going on with the car safeties. But since that's a different topic, but when you look at that, we all relate to hearing in our newspaper and the media when they die in a car accident or if they die in a homicide. But you don't hear so many people talking about someone that ended their life by suicide. And this next slide, this is Kentucky and Ohio numbers. So when we look at these two numbers, I have both of these on this slide because we're right there by the river. So I do a lot of these trainings over in Ohio. So, but when we look at it, the one thing I want us to look at on this slide, Kentucky experienced a little bit of an increase even in 2020 with suicide losses, even though other states saw a decrease. But one thing during that crisis, during 2020, during the pandemic, we saw almost a 6-time increase for those that are teens and young adults, saying that their mental health has suffered substantially. So we know that a lot of young people that couldn't go to school to be around their friends and classmates, they struggled a lot during that pandemic. And that will take years for them to try to get their life back on the path again, if you will, because they got so far behind during that lockdown. So when we look at this, male and female, who's more likely to end their life by suicide? Who's more likely to attempt to end their life by suicide? Very good. Perfect. Group almost agreed together saying we see more attempts from women that try to end their life by suicide. About 3 times more likely, a female will try or attempt to end their life by suicide. A male is 3.5 to 4 times more likely to end their life by suicide. How come? What's that?
Most veterans.
Veterans?
Yeah.
Veterans, we saw with our active military in 2012, we saw for the first time that in the military each year, we were losing more active personnel in the military to suicide than that died in the theater of action. You were more of a threat to yourself and your struggle than the enemy. And so when you look at that, you're saying, we've got to reach out to our veterans. We got to reach out to our military active personnel and say, we need to help them with these adjustments, these struggles. And so the one thing on here at the bottom of this slide here, it talks about most of the nation, you see that suicide is about twice as high as it is for homicides. For someone to take your life, you're about 2 times more likely to end your own life than someone taking your life. But in Kentucky, we see it almost 3 times. You're 3 times more likely to end your own life than die in a homicide of someone taking your life.
Yeah, we always get the bad record.
Kentucky gets the bad record for that. Well, we are one of the few states that we see that it's almost 3 times instead of 2 times. Yes.
Only I've encountered people who may have committed suicide if they were involved with substance abuse, and it was unclear if they just overdosed or if it was suicide. How do you figure that out?
Actually, that brings up another point that I hear quite often, because not only do I work with suicide prevention, I also have a survivors of suicide support group. And so up in Northern Kentucky at our church, the Christian Survivors of Suicide Loss Support Group, we have been together for 9 years, and we were only the 2nd church in the nation that addressed suicide loss. So churches, if anybody has any say so in your local churches or where you do go for your faith, speak to your staff saying, hey, we need to reach out to those many hurting people that have experienced the loss of someone by suicide. But going back to what you're saying, many people don't realize in the media, when someone ends their life by suicide, you almost always hear of a suicide note that was left behind. That's a myth. Only about 10% of those that die by suicide will leave a suicide note. The highest I've ever seen in any study was 25%, and that was a small study. Most of it has closer to 10%. So only 1 out of 10 people that die by suicide left a note to say, this was my intent. So overdoses, for instance, I've had parents and guardians and loved ones say, do you think my loved one took their life by suicide when they overdosed? The only what's that?
I think it's hard to differentiate.
It is.
Because the reason why is because people are taking drugs for mental health reasons.
Mental health and addiction goes hand in hand a lot.
All that really boils down to is they just kind of overdo something they've already been doing all along.
And the thing with addictions, this is really the little bit of time we have here for suicide prevention today could be a full day workshop on addictions and mental health, things that lead up to someone being suicidal. But the thing that we have to realize is that when someone says that to me as a question, do you think my loved one that died by a drug overdose, do you think that could have been a suicide? I would say, did that person leave a note behind saying that that was their intentions? And most of the time they'll say, no, they didn't. Unfortunately, the only person that can answer that question is no longer here to answer that question. And so we don't know that intent, but you're correct over here, sir. And what's your first name? Yes. John. Thank you, John. I'm bringing that up because a lot of times with addiction and suicide, they go hand in hand. But also remember this, someone that is struggling with their mental health and or struggling with an addiction or addictions, These are two diseases that still a lot of our society will blame the individual for having. Have you ever had someone that said they got cancer? And someone said, oh, how dare you get cancer? What'd you do to get that? You don't do it, do you? I'm sorry, I like to walk, I'm sorry. For people that may be watching on Zoom, I'm sorry, I moved out of the screen there for a second. I like to walk around to kind of get closer to everybody. But we see that with mental health and addictions, many people still blame the individual and they'll say, snap out of it. Why don't you just get over this already? As if it was that easy to do. They don't know what really is going on here with your great computer called the brain. If your brain is not working properly, there's things that happen here that many people don't understand because they don't see it. You can't see it even on tests that they run on the brain a lot of times. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I was wondering if they ever do autopsies on people after they died from, say, excess drugs, because I knew a lady who had epileptic seizures, and I wondered, you know, could she have, without meaning to, taken an extra dose of all of her meds or something? Mm-hmm. And, you know, that is easy to do, especially when you have a lot going on in your family. You've got a lot of responsibility, and you think, well, did I take my meds or not? Mm-hmm. And in her case, she had 5 children. And so, I don't know. I mean, I just kind of wonder if you could have taken an overdose without meaning, you know what I mean?
And unfortunately, autopsies aren't done on everybody. So we don't know what could have officially caused the death of someone. The coroner or medical examiner may say in a situation, it appears that this person died in this manner. But do we know what caused that person? Well, unless you do the autopsy and get into all the details, which can be time consuming and expensive to do that on everybody, they just say, to the best of our knowledge, here is what the cause of death was. And so really that's what these suicide numbers I was just showing you on how big of an issue it is. These are documented suicides. These aren't taken into account the overdoses, the people that die by automobile. I know of people that their loved one died from purposely running into a wall with their vehicle to end their life. Their police suicide by cop. Many of your shooters have actually gone into that shooting knowing that I'm probably either going to take my own life in this shooting or the police will take my life. So they die at the hands of the police officers that are there responding to that shooting. On this slide, as we're running out of time, like I said, I can already see we got some good conversations that some of y'all, it kind of sprung up, and I would encourage you to follow up. We could have other sessions based on specific things, but anybody ever heard of Abraham Lincoln? Okay, everybody knows who Abraham is. Okay, Abraham Lincoln is someone that said this, and I want you to think, have I ever heard this quote from Abraham Lincoln? I am now the most miserable man living. If what I feel were equally distributed to the whole human family, there would not be one cheerful face on the earth. Whether I shall ever be better, I cannot tell. I awfully forebode I shall not. To remain as I am is impossible. I must die or be better, it appears to me. This was in 1841 that the president of our United States of America went through such a severe bout of depression himself. I only have 2 paths that I can take here. I either have to get better, somehow find the help I need, even in 1841, or I'm going to die. When I was at my worst, my wife had to look at me dead in the eye and say to me, if you don't get help, you're going to die. And I knew she was right. So when you look at that, that is something I want us to remember, that any of us can be vulnerable. Any of us can have a point where mental health and or addiction affects us. Because how many people have you talked to over the years that said, I would never think about suicide, only to have them down the road end their life by suicide. And they assured me that they would never do that. So let me go through a couple of quick things here. When we did the male-female, we realized there was more males that end their life by suicide than female. The biggest reason why most people will say that's the case, it's the method. The method that was used in the attempt by a male is usually a handgun. Anyone that uses a handgun to attempt to end their life by suicide, you have less than a 1% chance of surviving. Yes.
I knew too, when I went to get one of my guidebooks,
Uh-huh.
there were two guys. Well, no. There was one guy there who tried to kill himself. Let's see, I knew several that tried to kill themselves. One guy was a prisoner and he tried to kill himself. They all just ended up going fly.
Oh, did they? And,
Yeah.
and we see that. We see the few that have survived a handgun or an attempt to end their life with a gun actually are permanently, they have a disability, whether it's blindness or it's caused some part of their brain to not function properly because of where the wound went in. But overall, when we look at males, the leading cause, and the slide I have up now for those that can't see the slide on the big screen over here, it actually has the leading causes of death for suicide for males. Handguns is by far the biggest one. But in 2020, looking at this green one, the largest one that we have on that chart is handguns. In 2018, for the first time, we saw that the leading cause for suicide loss for females became handguns. It was suffocation and drug poisoning, taking an overdoses purposely. But in 2018, we saw that shift, and now the leading cause of death by suicide for a female is a gun. How long will it be before we start seeing the numbers getting closer together for male and female on who actually does end their life by suicide? So as we wrap up, what I want us to do, I'm going to go through. If you wouldn't mind, Susan, if you want to invite me sometime to come back and share a little bit more, because I know with our questions, we're going to run out of time here today. But what I want to get to here real quick, some of the clues you may hear, I want to kill myself. If someone says that, they're serious. They need help. They may say, I wish I were dead. I'm going to commit suicide. I'm going to end it all. If such and such doesn't happen, I'll kill myself. When we hear those direct clues, they need help right then and there. You don't have time to call a counselor and set up an appointment, because a suicidal peak, when someone is most likely to end their life by suicide, is usually a few hours to a few days. They need help right then when it's at its worst. By the time you get an appointment with a counselor, it may be months down the road because they're backed up. That's why the crisis centers are so important, that you can get help when you need it. I'm going to challenge you all some homework. When I first got involved in suicide prevention, the phrase that you see on this slide, commit suicide. For many survivors of suicide loss and suicide attempt survivors, they hate that phrase, commit suicide. Because basically, by using the word commit, you're blaming the person. They committed that atrocity of trying to end their life, or they did end their life. When you commit something, it came from when trying to end your life by suicide, even here in the United States, you could have been arrested and put in prison if you survived your attempt, because it was against the law to try to end your life. 25 countries today still has that law. If you tried to end your life by suicide, you can be put in prison if you survive. So you commit a crime in their eyes. And that's where the phrase comes from. And many people that have experienced the loss of a loved one to suicide, they'll say, my loved one did not commit anything. They struggled with a mental health and or addiction issue or something, some kind of a trauma that caused them to think that suicide was an option. So I wanted to throw that one out to you to try to work on your own, to say, you know what, when it comes to someone's saying commit, let me say, could we say that they died by suicide? They suicided. They died from the results of struggling with mental health and or addiction for years, and it finally took their life. So when you look at indirect clues, here's some indirect clues that you might want to follow up and say, what do you mean? I'm tired of life. I just can't go on. My family would be better off without me. Who cares if I'm dead anyway? I just want out. I won't be around much longer. Pretty soon you won't have to worry about me. When someone uses one of these phrases here, always follow up with that person. What do you mean? Who cares if I'm dead anyway? What do you mean when you say that? I just want out. What does that mean to you? You may think you already know what they mean when they say it, but give them a chance to actually explain it, because what you're wanting to do is for them to talk about what they're going through at that moment. Because them talking may help them to come down from where they're thinking about suicide, because you're listening to them. Some clues may be any previous suicide attempt, more likely that they may attempt again, especially if it's more than twice. If you've already attempted more than twice to end your life by suicide, you're considered a moderate risk for suicide for the rest of your life by the clinical definition of it. So if you know people that's already attempted multiple times, they're higher risk. Acquiring a gun or stockpiling pills. For middle school people, as I was talking about earlier, getting all those prescription drugs in the house, poured into a bowl, just take them with a bottle of water, not knowing what you're taking. I've seen that happen so often. A co-occurring depression, moodiness, hopelessness, putting personal affairs in orders, trying to do it right now. I got to get all of this in order right now. You got time. Take your time. Do what's most important first. Well, that may be a sign that says they got to get things in order because they know that they're thinking about ending their life soon. And that's the bigger issue. So giving away a prized possession. If someone gives you something that they love, ask, I appreciate this offer, but why are you giving me this? You love this. Sudden interest or a disinterest in religion or their faith. If they were very involved in church and now they don't go at all, or someone that goes all the time now that never went, even if it's a good thing that they're going to church all of a sudden and getting involved in that church, still ask the question, why this change? Change is the biggest sign for any of us to look for. The people around you notice change. If you see a change in someone, please ask, why the change? Because it could be a lot more than you think. So when you look at some of these others, as we're getting really, actually we need to wrap things up. So with this question, whatever your question may be, are you thinking about suicide? It's the way that I like to ask it. Just come straight out. Because when you straight out ask, are you thinking about suicide? They either have to say yes, no, or they hesitate. When they hesitate, that gives you the answer that yes, they're thinking. Because if it's a yes or no, you can say it straight out. But if they hesitate, they're trying to figure out, okay, now what are they going to say when I say yes? Or do I want to say yes? So if they hesitate, that is really why I like as a counselor to ask that question. So don't be afraid to ask a question to someone. Are you thinking about suicide? Almost every one of us, if not all of us, has had a suicidal thought at one time in their life. It may have been very brief, or it may have lasted a while. So why don't we talk about suicide more often? Then sit there and give them your attention and your time, because that's what they want to know is you care, that you're there with them. So you can persuade them that there is help. Then please write down the 988 number, as we just heard here, and the 741-741. Write these down so you have access to them, because you never know. When you walk out of here today, you may come across someone that says, whoa, I need this information now. But thank you all so much for your time. I appreciate it. I wish we could talk much further, but for the sake of time and getting you guys back to where you need to go, I'm going to turn it over to Susan. Thank you.
Sir?
Yes. 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 No, if you're asking that, probably someone else is thinking.
At panic
Uh-huh.
and people perish in that water.
Mm-hmm.
How long do you think it takes to control some of them perish? So some of them within they die right off the deep tank.
That would be curious to see. I haven't seen any studies on the Titanic for those that survived. How many of them maybe went on and ended their life because of the tragedy that they encountered, just like military veterans. You've seen so much in the military. So when they do come back to civilization here in their hometowns and trying to live life again, you can't just shut off what you experienced while you were fighting for our country. And that's why a lot of people that are veterans and active military, so many of them are at risk for suicide. So that's a great point that you bring up. I'd be curious to see how many did go on and say, I can't handle this, knowing I went through that tragedy. Yes, ma'am.
Service is going starting now.
Okay. That's right. A lot of stuff. So you're in we're going to see that more. Yeah, I think we're already seeing. Doing research on what happened during the pandemic, they realized a lot of hospitals got financial help. So they let COVID on. Certain people, they got